Right. So that's like 20%. Okay, so the recording is now on. Okay, so can you guys see my screen, people?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. I can see that.
Yes, sir.
Oh, ठीक है. So yesterday we looked at this very simple, what looks like a verbal model over here of for alternative stable states in shallow lakes, and we said that if you have a situation whereby as nutrients increase, turbidity increases, and there is a critical turbidity beyond which vegetation cannot exist, and of course vegetation has a negative effect on turbidity due to this graph that we saw, this network of effects that we saw. Therefore, together this is going to explain the hysteresis that we ended up seeing in this particular case. All right, so this point beyond which the system goes from one relationship, one stable state to another stable state, this point is what is known as the, in the popular literature, this is what has become known as the tipping point. Now, two major points to note. One point I made yesterday was that although this is a very simple model with just 2 or 3 assumptions, even if you make it more complicated, the qualitative conclusions about the existence of two stable states, alternative stable states, will not change. The second point is that although here I am only showing you the graphical part of the model, this actually is a mathematical model, and I am going to, there is sufficient amount of maths behind this, and I'm going to share the original paper from which I took this. You'll get to know the maths in case you are interested right from there. So the other way in which one can visualize the same thing. So if you guys have looked at the theory of alternative stable states, then this kind of a diagram would be very, very familiar to you. So in these kind of diagrams, the system is typically modeled as a ball, and the state or the conditions under which the system is finding itself, that is typically modeled on some kind of a slope. Okay, a slope or collection of slopes, hills and valley kind of things. So the idea is that the system, the ball, is always going to roll down to the lowest point in this topography. Now, suppose you have a system like this where it is already at some kind of a local equilibrium. Okay, so now if you slightly take the ball up in this direction, or you take the ball up in this direction and you release it, it's going to always come down. Okay. Yeah, so it's always going to come down over here. However, once phosphorus accumulation starts, then the environment no longer remains the same. Then this topography on which this ball is rolling, that topography itself starts changing. Once that happens, that is analogous to these slopes changing over here, such that now you don't have this nice valley over here. This part remains roughly similar. This part starts going up, and then at some critical point, this thing now rolls down from here to here. This is the analogous of the regime shift. And once this ends up happening, then the system is now at a different stable state, and now it is close to impossible to bring it back over here until and unless you do some major perturbations from outside, and therefore now the system is going to stabilize in this zone, which is reminiscent of the turbid water zone. So this is just a visualization of the same thing. This is in terms of local stability and how local topography changes can lead you to a different stable point. And these notions that we are discussing, they form a very important part in nonlinear dynamics. Particularly, this is extreme value theory, etc. These are essentially dealing with these kind of problems. Extreme value theory and catastrophe theory, okay, both of them. And these notions and this area is generally used to answer hard questions like, why is it that the Sahara turned into a desert? Why is it that coral reefs, apparently very stable for thousands of years, suddenly collapse? And even social science questions like, how one can take people from the basin of poverty to a basin of relative affluence, and so on. So this has also been used for the financial market. And this kind of research is actually extremely popular, particularly because of the finance market fall apart. So people are always trying to predict how such regime shifts are going to happen. What are the tipping points, and what are the early warning signals? That's a technical term used. What are the early warning signals that a tipping point is being reached? So for example, I don't know if you guys have heard of this term called cryodynamics. Okay, so if you remember, when we were dealing with simple population dynamics models, we dealt with the work of Turchin and Taylor, Peter Turchin and Andy Taylor. So Peter Turchin has actually moved from population dynamics to modeling historical dynamics. And essentially, he is trying to take big historical data and trying to use some of these kind of models that we are talking about over here, and trying to see if that can predict the social dynamics, that can predict the crash of stock markets or something. He has always been famous. His work has always been very important, but of late, in 2020 in particular, his work again shot back into limelight, because apparently in 2010 or something like that, he had predicted very major socio-political unrest in the world system, of the kind that you are seeing in US and several different countries of the world right now. Okay, so this kind of stuff, although we are dealing it in the context of ecology, this actually is very, very broad-based stuff. And I'll give you guys one or two references at the end. If you guys are interested, we can discuss this, obviously outside the purview of this class. This is a very, very interesting and very, how do I say, current and hot field in biology, and pretty much much of science everywhere. So anyway, so back to shallow lakes. So now that we understand what happens in shallow lakes, what are the various interactions, and now that we also understand that simple reversal may not always work because of this alternative stable states, etc., etc., one can still, one has to go back to our original question: how does one reverse the trophic status of the lake? And in this particular case, you can reasonably proxy it by turbidity. So how can one reduce the turbidity of these lakes? So some of you guys made the point yesterday that there is no homeostasis happening over here, which is correct. Okay, and I explicitly said why that is so. So if you look at this diagram, what is the easiest way by which one can do an intervention by which one can reduce the turbidity of the system? And I mean, we can actually take each node and then we can discuss the feasibility of perturbing that node in detail. But since we are not very high on time, I'm going to tell you guys the easiest thing that one can do in the context of this diagram. And the easiest thing that one can actually do is to actually perturb this node. Okay, why this is the easiest node to perturb? Because these are what? Large fishes. Large fishes are the easiest to catch, okay, or introduce, whichever way you want to do it. In this particular case, you will have to reduce the number of fishes. What will happen then? If you reduce the number of fishes, then there are going to be less number of fishes disturbing the bottom sediment. So this loop will reduce in strength. If there are less number of fishes, then there will be more number of zooplanktons, and if there are more number of zooplanktons, then these guys are going to eat the phytoplankton, which is going to reduce the turbidity of the system. Okay, so this kind of a thing where you actually manipulate one or two trophic levels, typically one trophic level, to improve the health of the system, and in this particular case improve the health of the system in terms of turbidity. This thing is what is known as biomanipulation. Okay, manipulating an ecosystem through some biological intervention. The first or the second time I taught this, I had the misfortune of asking this question in the exam, what is biomanipulation? And one student very brilliantly wrote, when biologists manipulate data, that is called biomanipulation. So I can assure you that that is not what biomanipulation is all about. So anyway, so a lot of this work has happened in Netherlands, and that's primarily because they actually have lots of those shallow lakes. So this is about 18 lakes of different shapes and sizes in Netherlands, and in all those cases what they did was they removed a large number of fishes and then studied the transparency, which if you remember is opposite of turbidity, studied the transparency over X number of years after the biomanipulation. So in all these cases you see that initially transparency improves quite a bit. Okay, from 0 it goes to about 2.53 meters, but after that there is typically a decline. It doesn't stay over here. There is typically a decline, and then this is one case, this is another case, and in all those cases the initial success you can't hold on to it. It kind of comes down. It doesn't really go back to the original really terrible levels. Well, in this particular case it does, but in general holding on, I mean it doesn't stay stable. If you make a one-time manipulation, then you'll have to kind of repeat the thing after a few years in order to keep it steady. Otherwise it will kind of go back to if not its old state, at least a worse state than what you had achieved. So now the question is that, okay, we are talking about all these kinds of stuffs, and given that there are lots of chemicals in which people have reduced the proportion of phosphate, how bad is the scenario? Should we be really worried about this? Okay, because biomanipulation after all is not easy. If you are taking a lake and killing off lots of fishes, it has some amount of economic cost. So how bad is it? Should we be worried about it? So this is from a very recent review on phosphorus pollution in the world, and what it shows is that globally, due to human activities alone, 1.5 billion kilograms, that's 1.5 into 10 to the power 9 kilograms, are dumped just into the freshwater system. Forget about all those factories which are near the seas and therefore dumping into the seas. Just in the freshwater system, you have 1.5 billion tons of 1.5 billion kilograms of phosphorus. And if you look at which are the countries which are responsible for this, China is the world leader by a very long margin. They contribute about 30%, but we in India are number 2. Okay, we contribute 8% of the global anthropogenic phosphorus pollution, and that is one reason for which, if you look at the state of the health of the rivers and the lakes and the ponds in India, almost in all the cases it's actually pretty terrible. And according to the authors of this particular paper, Mekonnen, in many areas of the world, either we don't have enough water to assimilate the phosphorus, or the pollution load is so huge that the water system will not be able to take care of it. Which basically is saying the same thing. Which basically means there's too much of phosphorus. The water can't just take it out. The water can't process it due to biological activities. So if that be the case, then obviously one has to go beyond simple biomanipulation. So it turns out that there are a huge number of methods that have been proposed to deal with these problems. Since we have dealt with the causes of these problems, figuring out the solutions is actually reasonably simple. But what is more important is to see what are the pros and cons of it. So these methods, roughly you can divide them into three types: physical methods, chemical methods, and biological methods. So if you look at the physical methods, this is the source from which I have taken this stuff. You look at the physical methods, the most commonly used method is sediment dredging. Why sediment dredging? Because if you remember, when eutrophication starts, then the phosphorus starts leaching out from the sediment, and when that happens, that's when the feed forward thingy happens. So the easiest way of reducing the phosphorus load is to basically dredge the sediment as much as you can, and then that will hopefully bring out the lower reaches, lower non-phosphorated things from below. Now the issue is that you can't really do this dredging till you have removed most of the water. So typically, in order to do this, you have to dry up the whole thing. Now obviously that is going to lead to the almost complete extinction of the flora and fauna that is there. The other problem is that when you dredge all that sediment, I don't know if you have ever seen a lake being dredged, that damn thing stinks, seriously. So if you take all that stinky sediment, huge tons and tons of it, where are you going to throw it? It becomes difficult to find a place to throw. So overall, this is a reasonably expensive method. However, when I deal with all the other methods, we'll realize that this is actually the method which is followed in most of the cases. So for example, when I had come here in 2007, this Pashan Lake over here, that used to be very nice, pretty clean and all. Then in front of my own eyes, around 2010 or so, the lake became absolutely horrible. It was eutrophicating very badly. So what they ended up doing is they actually ended up drying up almost the entire Pashan Lake and did a massive sediment dredging. Took out a lot of stuff. I still have no idea where they dumped it. And then they actually made lots of changes in how the lake is managed, because of which nowadays you cannot really go and do anything at the Pashan Lake unless you are going from that highway side. From this side, from the Sutarwadi side, you cannot go in over there anyway, which is a terrible thing. I don't know how much effective it has been. They have increased the level of the lake so that now it holds more water. They have put some kind of a dam-like structure to do that. I don't know. I seriously don't know. I have severe doubts about the efficacy of the whole system. But then I haven't been there for a few years, so I don't really know what will be the long-term effect. But the simple point that I want to make is that sediment dredging is the most commonly used method all over the world, at least definitely in India. So the other thing that you can do is that you can, since there is a lot of nutrient-rich water, you can essentially flush the lake with a lot of nutrient-poor water. And if you do that, obviously the whole thing is going to get diluted. And when that happens, then hopefully things will become a bit better. But there are two issues over here. One is, where are you going to find that nutrient-poor water? Because nutrient-poor water means clean water, basically. Where the hell are you going to find that much of clean water from? And second thing is, in many cases, if the lake is reasonably full, then where is that extra water going to go? So you'll have to build the analogous of a dam in order to increase the level of the water, which itself is going to be very expensive in its own way. So dilution and flushing is not an easy thing to do. The other thing is to manipulate the water level. So instead of dilution or flushing, you do something by which essentially the water, water level changes. And the problem is that it is not easy to do that. And if you look at what I have written, you see that there are opposing effects over here. So if you increase the water level, you make it deeper, then you're going to have more water. Then you have less risk of resuspension of those sediments, all of which will act in one way. But then if you decrease the water level, then light is going to penetrate to a larger distance, and which is going to promote the growth of submerged macrophytes, those submerged vegetation that I was talking about. But then that is going to increase the concentration of phosphate, etc., etc. So it's not really an easy task to figure out that which one is going to be a more prominent effect and do that. And of course, from a very practical point of view, doing those kind of manipulations is not easy because of whatever we discussed in the last 2 points. So then this is a very interesting one. So if you remember, the maximum problem is happening towards the bottom part of the lake. That is where the water is losing all the oxygen, and that is where the phosphorus is coming from the sediments and so on. So one method that has been proposed is you by and large leave the upper part of the water as it is, and you pump the water from the bottom part, and you just essentially reject it. So that's what the bottom part of the lake is, what is known as hypolimnion. So that's what is meant by hypolimnetic withdrawal. Okay, so stick a pipe over there and just take it out. Now the problem again over here is, when you start doing it, obviously some amount of mixing is going to happen. You can't just ensure that you are taking it entirely from the bottom part, but that's a relatively lesser of a problem. The bigger problem is that if you take that much of anoxic, nutrient-rich, stinky water, where are you going to throw it? Because you can't just put it on the ground. You'll have to, kind of push it somewhere into another water body, and which water body is going to allow this stinky water to go into it? So that is obviously an issue if you get into hypolimnetic withdrawal. Otherwise, it's a nice thing to do and relatively inexpensive, because all it involves is pumping water out. So that brings us to the chemical methods. So one method is, again, remember the problem is in the hypolimnion, and the problem is happening because there is less oxygen. That is when under the anoxic condition the phosphorus has started coming out. So what you do is you basically oxygenate the hypolimnion. What do? You take oxygen or air, whatever, and then basically pump a lot of it into the hypolimnion, and that should create conditions by which the leaching of the oxygen, leaching of the phosphorus from the sediment will reduce. Now, unfortunately, it has been shown that you need to do this treatment for a very long time, and even when you do it for a long time, you aren't going to get permanent effects. So you have to keep on doing it, which kind of increases the cost factor in this, cost and effort factor in this. But otherwise, in terms of waste disposal, etc., all those problems don't arise in this case. The other simple thing is, if there is a lot of phosphorus, then just inactivate the phosphorus. Okay, make sure that the phosphorus becomes bio-non-available. So one of the ways in which you can do is, if you have various salts of aluminium, iron, calcium, etc., just push them in, and they will take the phosphorus from the water and just sediment down. The issue is that some of these salts, for example, aluminium, is toxic at high acidic or basic pHs, which makes it difficult to use it in eutrophicated water, remember, which is already in a high pH, which already has increased its pH quite a bit. So this is a promising method, but then one has to be very cautious about what else is happening because of those salts to all the flora and fauna in the area. And finally, we have the biological methods. So in these biological methods, one of them we already discussed, the removal of zooplankton eating fish. And as we saw, it might be a bit difficult to obtain permanent effects in this. You might have to do this quite a few times. The other thing is that if you look at the fishes which are eating those zooplanktons, then how about removing them, not by catching them, but by introducing a higher level predator? So basically introducing fish eating fishes. So the idea is they will eat the fishes, that will increase the number of zooplankton, that will decrease the number of phytoplankton, that will make the water clearer. Now turns out that this actually is not a bad solution. However, one has to make sure that the stocking of the predatory fish is done at the right time. If you don't do it, then it will be difficult to obtain the effect, because it's an effect which is kind of like 1, 2, 3 steps away. So we have to make sure that the availability of the predatory fish in the whole system happens at the correct time. Then there is another thing that people have tried to do, and that is introducing something which will directly feed on the phytoplanktons, but will do so even under high pH conditions, even under eutrophicating conditions. And turns out that mussels are a good alternative for doing that. However, the big issue is that many of these mussels, they are highly competitive, and therefore many of these mussels are known to be invasive species. So if you introduce a lot of mussels in your pond, you might end up getting a different kind of a scenario where mussels overrun the entire pond and you basically have the entire system collapsing anyway. So the basic point that I'm trying to make with this laundry list of various methods is that there isn't one simple single solution to curb this problem, and which solution you end up taking will depend critically on what is the actual condition over there. And you have to basically take multiple factors into account before you, as a consultant, end up suggesting one method over the other. It's not a simple problem. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, this is the point I was making. Tackling this problem itself is a complex activity. It requires not only a lot of science, which we discussed, but it also involves a lot of social science and talking and making sure that the local people are on board. So there are a number of references. I'm going to give you all these references at some point. So that's pretty much it as far as this topic is concerned. Since we have 15 minutes, I will now take questions if there are any. And yeah, I think today we have this valedictory function, right? So it will be nice to stop the class a little early so that you guys get enough time to log into that. So yeah, if you have questions, please let me know.
Sir, how did they measure if the phosphorus was coming from human activities only?
Because you can look at the runoff, you can figure out how much can you switch that off?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so you can you can test whatever the is going into the pond, the natural runoff. You can figure out how much phosphorus is there. You can estimate how much of water is going in. So you can estimate over the year, this is the amount of phosphorus that I expect from natural sources. Everything else is going to be human.
Okay.
I mean, that's one way. A simpler way will be, see, this is sewage and everything, right? These are basically coming through pipes. So you just take a sample at the pipe and then you measure how much phosphorus is there. You check the flow rate over 2 or 3 days. You know what is the flow amount that is there. From that, you also can get a direct estimate. Whichever way you do, it's easy. ठीक है. Whew. No, you don't need isotope testing. I mean, it's much simpler to do it. No, it might be coming from households, but whatever is coming from households is being collected through drains, and ultimately it is going, when it is entering into the water body, it's entering at just 1 or 2 points. You don't have each household having individual pipes going there, no.
Okay, yeah.
Of course, they have to extrapolate the data. Yeah, 1 at 10 to the power 9 kg, as you point out. You cannot just take a nice scale and measure it. Yes, detergents have reduced it, but it's still not entirely gone. Could the nutrient-rich water be recycled? I don't know if it can be done, because if it could have been done, then it would have been very easy to do it. One thing is that this water typically stinks a lot. Okay, and if the water stinks, then you can't use it in agriculture. Correct. So I mean, this is a very obvious possibility, but I have never seen anyone talk about this possibility. So there are probably some issues in recycling nutrient water for agriculture.
Okay, sir.
Why don't we segregate useful nutrients from the sediments? How will you do that? The expense is going to be too high, right? See, there is economics involved in the whole picture. Yeah, right. Somebody has said that would be economically unfeasible. Correct. Wouldn't the predator fish be somewhat larger in size and thus increase stability, especially in shallow lakes? Yes, absolutely. But the point is that they will be much fewer in numbers. Because remember that you need much larger number of prey to sustain just a few predators. Okay, so that way it will balance out. The total number of fish should go down drastically if this method for it to be effective. Yes, yes. So you have to kill quite a large number of fishes. Is it possible to genetically engineer bacteria that will sequester PO4? Where? Where will it sequester? Inside its own body? But if it does so, then when it dies, then that PO4 again returns into the system. Isn't it? Bolo.
Hello. Sir, I've read somewhere that in certain conditions, especially for fishery industries, what they have done is they have isolated some area with nets and all, and they have reintroduced the species which will, I don't remember the exact example, which will regain the water body quality and all. So after a certain period of time, the whole water body was replenished, not just the segment which they isolated. So can't we do this the same for the bacteria, like a certain?
No. But what did they introduce? One species which cleaned the entire water body.
No, it was a bacteria, somewhat like this. It was a petroleum spill or something in Serbia.
Oh, see, petroleum spill is a different ball game altogether. Okay, because in the context of petroleum spill, what is happening is that the spill is only on the surface of the water, right? So when you introduce the bacteria, they are only on that area. They are nowhere else. There is no mixing happening, right? So now in this particular case, first of all, when you start introducing the bacteria, you'll be introducing a huge amount. Okay, because the thing, you have to take care of the whole pond, which is fine. But the point is that what will happen? Where will they sequester the thing? They will sequester the thing inside their body, right? Remember, petroleum is carbon. This is phosphate that we are talking about. So at
Yeah.
best, they will take a lot of that and they will have it inside their body, which is cool. But then what will happen when they die? And they have to die at some point.
Like keeping aside the economics thing, can't we provide them of different media where, like, it's too hypothetical, I know, but
If you provide them with a different media, then you are changing the the composition of the lake. Because after all, that media has to be put in the lake only, no? Then you'll have to see what that media is doing to the fishes and all the other things.
yeah.
It's a complex problem. I'm not saying, what you are saying will be, impossible, but I'm saying that it will be difficult. There will be fairly large number of things that one has to take care of. Okay? See, that way, though, you don't have to do anything. You just keep on cleaning the algal bloom from the surface. No, because they are the major problem. If you just keep on cleaning the algal bloom from the surface, then things will work out. But turns out that cleaning the algal bloom from the surface is a very difficult job. If you can come up with a cost-effective way of doing it, then you don't need anything else.
I read somewhere that there are some kind of fishes that eat algae or something, and they are used to clear the algal blooms. Now, if like fishing is easier than like cleaning algae, I guess. So,
That is,
I,
yes.
so you like release those fish into a lake. They eat up the algae, and then you like fish them back, and now you have done, taken out a lot of phosphorus that way.
Not that easy. Not that easy, because the moment you remove the fish, then the algal population will again bounce back. So you'll
Yeah,
have to
but then
keep the fish inside the system. You
yeah,
can't
so
take it out outside.
let's not take out all of the fish, but like leave some so that they can regenerate a population. So like over time it will sequester a lot of phosphorus in their bodies, and then we can just take them out and like eat them or
Yeah,
something.
but phosphorus rich fish. No, that is fine. But are there, efficient phytoplankton eating fishes? I'm not aware of it, because if they are there, then what you are saying will be like a no-brainer. But I haven't seen people, using the concept of putting phytoplankton eating fishes. So maybe what you are suggesting, they exist, but they are not efficient. One has to check that part. So just have a look and let me know which species you had in mind.
Yeah, not that I don't know a lot about it, but I think I read it somewhere once in a while.
एक बार देख लो अगर if you can get something.
Yeah.
ठीक है. No, see, what Arjun is saying is, wouldn't using the nutrient-rich water for agriculture just end up eventually dumping the phosphate back into the same water body through runoffs? The point is, even if, let's say, X percentage of it is used in agriculture, I mean, in promoting the growth of the plants, then that is great, na? I mean, assuming the economics works out. Some part of it will always come back. It's a cycle. You can't prevent it. But if X percentage goes in feeding your plants, cool. Does phosphate does anything directly? See, phosphate is also going to promote the growth of the submerged vegetation, the macrophytes, but that is typically good for the health of the lake, at least for the shallow ones. So that is not an issue. Does excessive phosphate do anything to fishes? Quite frankly, I don't know. But my guess is that if you have excessive phosphorus, that is going to form weak acids, right? Phosphoric acid. So I guess that somewhere the thing will become more acidic, but whether it will go into danger zone or not, I really don't know. I mean, phosphoric acid is known to be a very weak acid. So I don't know whether it will have a massive effect on the pH or not. Anything? Anything else, people? Oh, it's still presenting. Okay, if there is nothing else, I'll stop the recording. Raghunandan, are you there? Raghunandan DR? Raghu? Raghunandan, has he left?